Let me ask you something. You're out on the water in January. It's cold, maybe a little bit of wind. You're not getting a single bite. What's the first thing you blame? The weather, right? You tell yourself the barometric pressure is wrong, or the fish are just shut down because of the cold front that moved through 2 days ago. We all do it. But what if I told you the weather is just a convenient excuse, that the real problem is sitting right there in your boat or on your ice fishing bucket? In this video, we're going to expose the hard truth about why so many anglers fail in the winter. And I promise you, by the end of this, you will look at a bad weather day completely differently. So let me ask again, do you really think it's the weather? Or is it time to admit we might be the ones making the mistakes? For generations, we've been fed this idea that fishing success is tied directly to being an amateur meteorologist. Old-timers, magazines, even television shows have drilled it into our heads. Fish bite when the pressure is falling. Don't even bother after a cold front. Wind from the east, fish bite the least. These sayings become gospel, and it's easy to see why. They give us a simple, external reason for our failure. It's not our fault we didn't catch anything. The conditions were just wrong. It's a comfortable belief that absolves us of responsibility. This mindset makes us passive. We wait for the perfect day instead of learning how to succeed on an imperfect one. We let the forecast dictate our confidence before we even make our first cast. It's a cycle of blame that has kept countless anglers from realizing their true potential during the toughest months of the year. Let's start with the most common scapegoat, barometric pressure. We stare at the barometer on our fish finders or weather apps like it holds the ancient secrets to the universe. Yes, significant rapid changes in pressure can influence fish behavior. A sharp drop can trigger a feeding window, and a spike can sometimes slow things down. But here's the uncomfortable truth most won't admit. Fish still have to eat every single day, regardless of what the barometer is doing. They don't just stop metabolizing for 72 hours because the pressure went up by a few points. The perfect pressure window might make them more aggressive and willing to chase, but on a bad pressure day, they are still feeding somewhere. They might just be holding tighter to cover, or only willing to eat a much smaller, slower-moving meal. Blaming the pressure is the equivalent of saying humans won't eat lunch because it's cloudy outside. It's a gross oversimplification we use to justify giving up too early. Now let's talk about cold fronts and water temperature. This is another giant in the Hall of Fame of fishing excuses. The water temperature dropped 5 degrees, so the fish must have lockjaw. It's true that as cold-blooded creatures, a fish's metabolism slows in cold water. They are not going to chase down a fast-moving crankbait like they would in the summer, but they absolutely do not stop feeding. Think about it from a survival standpoint. A bass, a walleye, a pike, they need to consume calories to survive the winter. They are opportunistic predators. The problem isn't that they won't eat. The problem is that we are still trying to feed them a 5-course meal when all they want is a small snack. We're throwing the same half-ounce jigs and 4-inch swim baits we used in October. We're fishing way too fast, way too aggressively, for fish whose strike zone may have shrunk to the size of a dinner plate. The temperature didn't stop the bite. Our failure to adapt to it did. So if the weather isn't the real villain, what is? It's something I call angler inertia. It's our own physical and mental laziness on the water. Picture this scene. You get to your favorite spot, a spot that was on fire a few months ago. You anchor up or drill your holes. You make a cast with your confidence lure. Nothing. You make another 10 casts. Still nothing. What do? Most anglers will just stay there casting the same lure over and over, maybe for 30 minutes, maybe for an hour. They'll tell themselves the fish are just not biting today. They might change the color of the plastic worm, thinking that's a major strategic shift. But they won't move the boat 50 yards. They won't switch from a jig to a drop shot. They won't downsize their line. They become statues locked into a failing pattern, all while blaming the invisible forces of the weather for their lack of success. That inertia is the real killer of a winter fishing trip. Let's dig deeper into this idea of angler inertia. It starts with your mindset before you even launch the boat. You look at the sky, feel the cold, and you've already decided it's going to be a grind. This negative mindset is poison. It makes you less likely to make needed changes. Why bother retying a whole new rig when you probably won't get a bite anyway? Why bother firing up the big motor and running 10 minutes to a new spot when this one is just as dead as any other? This defeatist attitude creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. You expect not to catch fish, so you fish in a low-effort, uninspired way that guarantees you won't catch fish. The successful winter angler, on the other hand, sees the bad weather as a puzzle to be solved, not a verdict on the day's outcome. They have a mindset of relentless experimentation because they know the fish are somewhere, and it's their job to figure out how to make them bite. The first and most critical change you must make is to your location. Fish in the winter, especially in January, are often grouped up in very specific areas. They aren't spread out all over the lake like they are in the spring. They could be packed onto one small rock pile, one specific channel bend, or one tiny patch of green weeds. This means that you can be just 20 feet away from a huge school of fish and not even know they are there. Staying in one spot for an hour is the worst thing you can do. You have to adopt a search and destroy mentality. Spend no more than 10 to 15 minutes in a spot without a bite. Use your electronics to find any small irregularity on the bottom, a single boulder, a small depression, a fallen tree. Fish it thoroughly but quickly. If you don't get a bite or see any signs of life on your graph, you must move. Cover water until you find them. The winning pattern might be on one single spot on the entire lake, and you'll never find it if you're parked in the wrong place all day. Once you commit to moving, the next variable is your lure. This is where so many people get it wrong. They might change from a green pumpkin jig to a black and blue jig. That's not a real change. A real change is a complete shift in profile, action, and size. If you're not getting bit on a half-ounce football jig, don't just change the color. Switch to something entirely different, like a Ned rig on a 1/16 ounce head. That's a dramatic downsizing in both size and rate of fall. Or try a drop shot with a tiny 3-inch finesse worm, which allows you to keep the bait in the strike zone without moving it forward. The principle is simple. If your first approach isn't working, don't just tweak it. Burn it to the ground and try something from the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Go from big to small, from fast to slow, from aggressive to subtle. The fish will tell you what they want, but you have to be willing to ask them different questions by presenting wildly different baits. Let's talk about the single most overlooked factor in winter fishing, your retrieve. It's not just about what you're throwing, it's about how you're working it. The metabolism of a largemouth bass in 39-degree water is incredibly slow. It's not going to chase down a bait that's being hopped and ripped off the bottom. You need to slow down. You need to slow down even more than that. I'm talking about painfully, excruciatingly slow. Imagine you cast out a jig. Instead of hopping it back to the boat, you just drag it. You slowly pull it an inch or two across the bottom, then you let it sit there. Let it sit for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, even 30 seconds. That extended pause is often what triggers a bite. The bass comes over to investigate this thing that just puffed up some silt. It looks at it, it studies it, and after an eternity of sitting perfectly still, the bass finally decides to just slurp it in. Most anglers simply don't have the patience for this kind of fishing, so they speed up their retrieve and fish right over the top of biting fish. Another critical component is line size. In the summer, you can get away with throwing heavy braided line or 17-pound fluorocarbon. The fish are aggressive, and the water often has more color to it. In the crystal clear, cold water of January, that heavy line looks like a rope to a fish. It also kills the action of your small, finesse baits and drastically reduces your bait's rate of fall. Downsizing your line is not a suggestion, it is a requirement for tough winter bites. We're talking about 6-pound or even 4-pound test fluorocarbon leaders. This isn't just about visibility. The thinner diameter line allows your tiny Ned rig or drop shot bait to have a much more natural, subtle action. It sinks slower and more horizontally rather than plummeting. This gives lethargic fish more time to see it and decide to eat it. If you're still using your standard summer setup in the dead of winter, you are costing yourself dozens of bites. It's that simple. Think about the sounds you're making. In the calm, cold air of winter, sound travels incredibly well through the water. Are you stomping around in your aluminum boat? Are you dropping pliers on the deck? Are you running your trolling motor on high, right over the spot you want to fish? All of these things can alert fish to your presence and put them on edge, making an already tough bite even tougher. Approach your spots with stealth. Cut your big motor well before you get to the spot and use your trolling motor on a low setting to quietly ease into position. If you're ice fishing, avoid drilling a dozen holes right on top of the structure. Drill your holes around the perimeter and fish towards it. Every little noise you make is a potential reason for a neutral fish to decide not to eat. We often blame the weather for a dead spot when, in reality, we were the ones who spooked all the fish before we even made a cast. Let's put all this together into a real-world scenario. You've been fishing a main lake point for 15 minutes with a jig, no bites. Your old self would have stayed there, maybe switching jig colors. Your new self does something different. First, you move. You look at your map and see a nearby channel swing that creates a steep drop-off. You idle over there, quietly. Second, you change your lure completely. You put down the bulky jig and pick up a spinning rod with a drop-shot rig and a tiny finesse worm tied to a 6-pound leader. Third, you change your presentation. You drop the rig straight down to the bottom, right on the edge of the drop-off. You don't hop it, you don't drag it, you just hold it, letting the worm quiver in place, suspended just a few inches off the bottom. You are now presenting a completely different bait in a different location with a totally different retrieve and line size. You have changed every single variable you can control instead of worrying about the one you can't, the weather. A huge mistake many anglers make is what I call memory fishing. They go back to the same spot where they caught fish in May or September and expect them to be there in January. Fish migration is a real thing. The bait fish have moved and the predator fish have followed them. That shallow flat that was full of bass in the spring is likely a barren desert in the winter. The fish have probably pulled out to the first major drop-off, or they've moved into the deeper basin to follow schools of shad. You have to fish for the fish that are there now, not the fish that were there 6 months ago. Forget your favorite spots. Start with a blank slate and use your electronics and your knowledge of seasonal patterns to locate where the fish should be in the current conditions. Winter fishing is about finding the fish first and then figuring out how to catch them. You can't do the second part if you're stuck on the first part, fishing empty water based on old memories. Let's consider the bait fish. This is the entire key to the puzzle. In winter, the primary food source, like shad or shiners, often groups up into massive, tightly packed schools. They move to deeper, more stable water where the temperature is more consistent. Find the bait, and you will find the predator fish. They won't be far away. They'll be suspended just below or to the sides of these bait balls, waiting for an easy meal. This is where your electronics are not just helpful, they are absolutely essential. Spend time idling and graphing, looking for those big clouds of bait on your sonar. Don't even start fishing until you find them. Once you mark a big school of bait, you can be confident that bass or walleye are nearby. This is a much more efficient strategy than blindly casting at the bank. You are actively hunting for the dinner table instead of just hoping a hungry fish swims by your random location. Now let's address a mental trap, the idea of a secret lure. Too many anglers believe there's one magic bait that will solve all their winter fishing problems. They'll spend hundreds of dollars on the latest and greatest cold water killer lure. But a lure is just a tool. The most expensive jerkbait in the world is useless if you're fishing it in an area with no fish. The most perfectly designed finesse jig is worthless if you're working it too fast. It's not about the what, it's about the where and the how. A successful winter angler could likely catch fish with a very small selection of basic lures, a simple jig, a drop shot, a Ned rig, a blade bait, because they have mastered the art of location and presentation. Stop searching for a magic bullet in your tackle box and start focusing on becoming a better detective on the water. The clues are there. You just have to be willing to look for them instead of looking for a shortcut. Let's talk about timing. We often assume that the best bite in the winter is going to be in the middle of the day during that peak warming period. And sometimes that's true. That 1 or 2 degree bump in water temperature can make fish slightly more active. However, this is not a universal rule. I have had some of my best winter fishing days during the first hour of daylight, or during periods of low, stable light, like on a cloudy day. There can also be very specific feeding windows tied to other factors, like current generation from a dam. The point is, don't assume the bite will only happen between noon and 2 o'clock. Be on the water and be fishing effectively during all parts of the day. The fish might only feed for a 30-minute window. If you're busy eating a sandwich or blaming the weather during that window, you'll miss your opportunity and declare the whole day a failure. You have to be persistent and stay focused. Let's re-examine the wind. Well, wind from the east, fish bite the least. We've all heard it. But what does wind actually do? It creates current and pushes surface water, which in turn pushes plankton, which in turn attracts baitfish. A wind-blown bank can be a fantastic place to fish, even in the winter. The baitfish get pushed up against that bank and the predator fish will follow. The wind also breaks up the surface of the water, which reduces light penetration and can make fish feel more comfortable and less spooky, encouraging them to move shallower to feed. So while a howling cold wind might be uncomfortable for you, the angler, it can actually be creating a prime feeding opportunity. Instead of running away from the wind to find a calm cove, try bundling up and fishing directly into it. The bad weather might be pointing you exactly where you need to be. Again, it's about changing your perspective from comfort-seeking to fish-seeking. Consider the vertical presentation. In cold water, fish are often not willing to move horizontally to chase a bait, but they will often move a few feet vertically to eat something that is presented right above their heads. This is why tools like blade baits, spoons, and drop-shot rigs are so effective in the winter. They allow you to fish straight up and down. You can use your electronics to locate a single fish or a small school, position your boat directly over them, and drop your bait right into their living room. You can watch your lure on the sonar screen as it drops down to the fish. You can see the fish rise up to meet it. This is a deadly effective, high-percentage way to fish that completely removes the guesswork. You are no longer casting and hoping. You are targeting specific, individual fish that you can see. This method is impossible if you are stuck in the mindset of just casting towards the bank. Let's talk about color selection, but in a more intelligent way. Most anglers just randomly switch between colors they like. Green pumpkin isn't working, let me try black and blue. A more strategic approach is to think about water clarity and available light. In the clear water of winter, natural translucent colors are often best. Things that mimic the local baitfish, shades of silver, grey, white, or very subtle greens and browns. You want your bait to look as natural and non-threatening as possible. If the water has some color to it from a recent rain or melt, then you might consider a slightly more solid or darker color to create a better silhouette. But the key is to make small, logical adjustments based on the conditions, not just randomly cycling through your tackle box. Start natural and only get brighter or darker if that approach fails. Don't overthink it, but don't ignore it either. We need to discuss scent. This is a massively underrated tool in cold water. A fish's sense of smell still works very well in the winter. Because you are fishing so slowly and letting your bait soak in one place for long periods, scent can be the final trigger that convinces a hesitant fish to bite. A lethargic bass might come over to inspect your jig that has been sitting still for 20 seconds. It sees it, but it's not quite convinced. Then it gets a whiff of garlic or crawfish scent. That extra sensory input can be all it takes to close the deal. It's a small detail, but in a game of inches like winter fishing, small details make all the difference. It takes 2 seconds to add scent to your bait, and there is absolutely no downside. If it gives you even 1 or 2 extra bites on a tough day, it was more than worth it. Yet, so many anglers ignore this simple step. Here is a practical checklist to run through before you decide a spot is dead. 1. Have I made at least 5 casts to every conceivable piece of cover in this area? 2. Have I tried at least 3 completely different lure types? For example, a bottom contact bait, a suspending bait, and a vertical bait. 3. Have I varied my retrieve from a slow drag to a hop and pause to a dead stick? 4. Am I using the lightest line I can get away with for this technique? 5. Have I been here for more than 15 minutes without a single sign of life? If you can honestly answer yes to all of these questions, then and only then do you have permission to call the spot dead and move on. Most anglers leave a spot after only trying 1 or 2 things. They never truly work the area effectively. They are leaving biting fish behind because they lack a systematic and disciplined approach. Ultimately, this all boils down to one fundamental shift in thinking. You must stop thinking of yourself as a passive victim of the weather and start thinking of yourself as an active problem solver. The conditions are not a judgment, they are simply a set of variables. Your job is to constantly adjust your own variables, location, lure, speed, depth, line size, until you find the combination that works. The fish are always biting somewhere, somehow, always. There is no such thing as a day where every single fish in the lake has decided not to eat. There are only days where we, the anglers, fail to solve the puzzle. The moment you truly accept that the responsibility for success or failure rests entirely on your shoulders and not on the clouds in the sky, is the moment you become a consistently successful winter angler. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the absolute truth. So let's wrap this up. For years, the weather has been our number one excuse. It's been our crutch. It's been the easy answer for why we failed. But the big twist, the real secret, is that the most unpredictable and important variable on the water isn't the barometric pressure or the wind chill, it's you. It's your willingness to move, to change lures, to slow down, to downsize your line, and to abandon a failing game plan. It's about fighting that mental and physical inertia that tells you to just stay put and keep doing the same thing. Understanding this can fundamentally change your entire approach to fishing, not just in January, but all year round. You stop being a passive reactor to the conditions and become an active hunter, constantly adjusting and probing until you crack the code. The power is in your hands, not in the forecast. Thank you so much for watching. If this changed your perspective, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and get ready for more content that cuts through the noise. Now I want to hear from you. What's the one weather rule you've always followed that you're now ready to break? Drop your answer in the comments below and let's talk about it.